We are continuing our extended story on Thumb Wind's End of the Road in Michigan podcast, A Fortnight in the Wilderness by Alexis de Tocqueville. In 1831, two 26-year-old French aristocrats, Alexis de Tocqueville and Gustave de Beaumont, decided to strike out, in what today's terms, would be the ultimate road trip. Namely, traveling overland from Detroit, to the last settlement in the Northwest Territories, to Saginaw, Michigan. This is the third part of our series. When we last left Alex and Gustave, they were lodging in Pontiac and getting a backwoods education on the best way to continue on to Saginaw. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this week's tale from the end of the road. Part 4, July 24, 1831, striking out into the wilderness toward the Flint River. On the next day, we rose with the dawn and prepared to start. Our host was soon stirring. The night had not revealed to him the motives of our extraordinary conduct. As, however, we appeared quite determined to despise his advice, he dared not return to the charge, but he always kept at our side, and now and then reflected, in an undertone. I do not well make out what can take two strangers to Saginaw. Till at last, I said to him as I put my foot into the stirrup, we have many reasons for going there, my dear landlord. He stopped short at these words, and, looking me in the face for the first time, seemed prepared to receive the revelation of the great mystery. But I, quietly mounting my horse, gave him no other solution than a friendly wave of the hand, after which I trotted off as fast as I could. We had been advised to apply to Mr. Williams, who, as he had long dealt with the Chippewa Indians, and had a son established at Saginaw, so might give us useful information. After riding some miles in the forest, just as we fancied that we had missed our friend's house, we saw an old man working in a little garden. We spoke to him and found that he was Mr. Williams. He received us with much kindness and gave us a letter to his son. We asked him if we had anything to fear from the Indian tribes through whose territories we were about to pass. Mr. Williams rejected this idea with a sort of indignation. No, he said, you may proceed without fear. For my part, I sleep more fearlessly among Indians than among white people. I note this as the first favorable impression given to me of the Indians since my arrival in America. In the thickly peopled districts, they are always spoken of with a mixture of fear and contempt, and I think that in those places, they deserve both. A few pages back may be seen what I myself thought of them when I met the first specimens at Buffalo. If the reader, however, will go on with this journal and follow me among the European settlers on the frontier, as well as among the Indian tribes, he will form a higher, and at the same time, a juster idea of the aborigines of America. After we left Mr. Williams, we pursued our road through the woods. From time to time, a little lake, this district is full of them, shines like a white tablecloth under the green branches. The charm of these lonely spots, as yet untenanted by man, and where peace and silence reign undisturbed, can hardly be imagined. I have often climbed the wild and solitary passes of the Alps, where nature refuses to obey the hand of man, and, displaying all her terrors, fills the mind with an exciting and overwhelming sensation of greatness. The solitude here is equally profound, but the emotions it excites are different. In this flowery wilderness where, as in Milton's Paradise, all seems prepared for the reception of man, the feelings produced are tranquil admiration, a soft melancholy, a vague aversion to civilized life, and a sort of savage instinct which causes you to regret that soon this enchanting solitude will be no more. Already, indeed, the white man is approaching through the surrounding woods. In a few years, he will have felled the trees now reflected in the limpid waters of the lake and will have driven to other wilds the animals that feed on its banks. Still traveling on, we reached a country of a different aspect. The ground was no longer flat but thrown into hills and valleys. Nothing can be wilder than the appearance of some of these hills. In one of these picturesque passes, we turned suddenly to contemplate the magnificent scene which we were leaving behind, and, to our great surprise, we saw close to us, and apparently following us step by step, a Red Indian. He was a man of about 30, tall and admirably proportioned. His black and shining hair fell down upon his shoulders, with the exception of two tresses, which were fastened on the top of his head. His face was smeared with black and red paint. He wore a sort of very short blue blouse. His legs were covered with red mittas, a sort of pantaloons that reaches only to the top of the thigh, and his feet were defended by moccasins. At his side hung a knife. In his right hand, He held the long rifle, and in his left 2 birds that he had just killed. The first sight of this Indian made on us a far from agreeable impression. The spot was ill-suited for resisting an attack. On our right, a forest of lofty pines, on our left a deep ravine, at the bottom of which a stream brawled among the rocks, hidden by the thick foliage, so that we approached it, as it were, blindfold. To seize our guns, turn round and face the Indian in the midst of the path was the affair of an instant. He halted in the same manner, and for half a minute, we all were silent. His countenance presented the characteristics of the Indian race. In his deep black eyes sparkled the savage fire which still lights up those of the half-caste, and is not lost before 2 or 3 crossings of white blood. His nose was aquiline, slightly depressed at the end, his cheekbones very high, and his wide mouth showed 2 rows of dazzlingly white teeth, proving that the savage, more cleanly than his neighbor, the American, did not pass his day in chewing tobacco leaves. I said that when we turned around, arms in hand, the Indian stopped short. He stood our rapid scrutiny with perfect calmness, and with a steady and unflinching eye. When he saw that we had no hostile intentions, he smiled. Probably he perceived that we had been alarmed. I never before had remarked how completely a mirthful expression changes the savage physiognomy. I have 100 times since I had occasion to notice it. An Indian grave and an Indian smiling are different men. In the motionless aspect of the former, there is a savage majesty that inspires involuntary fear. But, if the same man smiles, his countenance takes an expression of simplicity and benevolence, which is really captivating. When we saw our Indian thus unbend, we addressed him in English. He allowed us to talk as long as we liked, and then made signs that he did not understand us. We offered him brandy, which he readily accepted without thanking us. Still making signs, we asked him for the birds which he carried. He gave them to us for a little piece of money. Having made acquaintance, we bid him adieu and trotted off. At the end of half an hour of fast riding, on turning round, once more, I was astounded by seeing the Indian still at my horse's heels. He ran with the agility of a wild animal, without speaking a single word or seeming to hurry. We stopped, he stopped, we went on, he went on. We darted on at full speed. Our horses, natives of the wilderness, leapt quickly every obstacle. The Indian doubled his pace. I saw him, sometimes on the right, sometimes on the left of my horse, jumping over the brushwood and alighting on the ground without the slightest noise. He was like one of the wolves of the north, which are said to follow horsemen in the hope of their falling and thus becoming more easy prey. The sight of this strange figure, now lost in the darkness of the forest, and then again appearing in the daylight, and seeming to fly by our side, became at last an annoyance. As we could not imagine what induced him to follow us at such a rapid rate, he might, indeed, have long accompanied us before we perceived him for the first time. It occurred to us that he was leading us into an ambush. We were full of these thoughts, when we discovered, right in front of us in the wood, the end of another rifle. We soon came alongside the bearer. We took him at first for an Indian. He wore a kind of short frock coat, tight at the waist, showing an upright and well-made figure. His neck was bare, and his feet covered by moccasins. When we were close to him, he raised his head. We at once saw that he was a European, and we stopped short. He came to us, shook us cordially by the hand, and we entered into conversation. "Do you live in the wilderness?" "Yes, here is my house." And he showed us, among the trees, a hut even more miserable than the ordinary log house. "Alone?" "Alone." "And what do you do with yourself here?" "I roam about the woods, and I kill right and left the game, which comes in my way, but the shooting is not good here now." "And you like this sort of life?" "Better than any other." "But are you not afraid of the Indians?" "Afraid of the Indians? I had rather live among them than in the society of white men." No, I am not scared of the Indians. They are better people than we are unless we have brutalized them with strong liquors, poor creatures." We then showed to our new acquaintance the man who followed us so obstinately, and who at that moment was standing stock still a few paces off. "He is a Chippewa," said our friend, or, as the French would call him, a sauteur or cavalier. "I would lay a wager that he is returning from Canada, where he has received the annual presents from the English. His family cannot be far off." So speaking, the American signed to the Indian to approach and began to talk to him in his language with high fluency. The pleasure that these two men, so different in race and in habits, took in exchanging their ideas, was a striking sight. The conversation evidently turned upon the relative merit of their arms. After examining the rifle of the savage carefully, the white man said to us, "This is an excellent musket, the English no doubt gave it to him, that he might use it against us, and he will certainly do so in the first war." This is how the Indians called down upon their own heads their misfortunes, but they know no better, poor things. Are the Indians skillful in the use of these long heavy guns? "There are no shots like the Indians," replied our new friend, in a tone of the greatest admiration. "Look at the little birds which he sold you, sir, there is but one shot in each, and I am sure that he fired at them only twice. Oh," he added, "there is no man so happy as an Indian in the districts whence we have not yet frightened away the game, but the larger sort scent our approach at a distance of more than 300 miles, and, as they retire, they leave the country before us a waste, incapable of supporting the poor Indians, unless they cultivate the ground." As we were resuming our journey, our new friend called out to us, "When you pass here again, knock at my door. It is a pleasure to meet white faces in this place." I have reported this in itself unimportant conversation, in order to give an idea of a description of a man that we often met on the borders of the habitable world. They are Europeans, who, despite the habits of their youth, have become enamored of the liberty of the wilderness. Attached to the wilds of America by taste and inclination, to Europe by their religion, principles, and ideas, they unite a love for a simple life with the pride of civilization and prefer the Indians to their own countrymen, though without acknowledging them as equals. We proceeded on our way. We maintained the same rapid pace, and in half an hour, reached the house of a pioneer. Before the door of the hut, an Indian family had encamped. An old woman, 2 young girls, and several children were crouching around a fire, to the heat of which were exposed to the still palpitating limbs of a whole kid. A few steps off, an Indian was lying entirely naked on the grass, basking in the sun, while a little child was rolling about in the dust by his side. Here our silent companion stopped. He left us without bidding us adieu, and sat down gravely among his countrymen. What could have induced this man to follow our horses for 5 miles? We never could guess. After breakfast in this spot, we remounted and pursued our journey through a wood of thinly scattered lofty trees. The underwood had been burnt away, as was evident from the calcined remains on the grass. The ground was covered with fern, extending under the trees as far as the eye could reach. Some miles further on, my horse lost a shoe, which caused us great embarrassment. Not far off, happily, we met a planter, who succeeded in putting it on again. If we had not fallen in with him, I doubt if we could have gone on further, for we had nearly reached the end of the clearings. The settler who enabled us to continue our journey, advised us to make haste, as the daylight was beginning to fail, and we were at least 5 miles from Flint River, where we intended to sleep. Soon indeed, we were enveloped in perfect darkness. We were forced to push on. The night was fine but intensely cold. The silence of the forest was so deep, the calm so complete, that the forces of nature seemed paralyzed. No sound was heard but the annoying hum of the mosquitoes, and the stamp of our horses' feet. Now and then, we saw the distant gleam of fire, against which we could trace, through the smoke, the stern and motionless profile of an Indian. At the end of an hour, we reached a spot where the roads separated, 2 paths opened out in different directions. Which should we take? The choice was difficult. One led to a stream, we did not know how deep, the other to a clearing. The moon just rising showed us a valley full of fallen trees. Further on, we described 2 houses. It was of so much consequence not to lose our way in such a place and at such an hour, that we determined to take advice before proceeding. My companion remained to take care of the horses, whilst I, with my gun over my shoulder, descended into the valley. Soon I perceived that I was entering a new settlement. Immense trunks of trees, their branches as yet unlopped, covered the ground. By jumping from one to another, I soon was near the houses. But the stream separated me from them. Happily, its course was impeded in this place by some huge oaks that the pioneer's axe had no doubt thrown down. I succeeded in crawling along with these trees, and at last, reached the opposite side. I warily approached the 2 houses, which I could see but indistinctly. I feared they might prove Indian wigwams. They were unfinished. The doors were open, and no voice answered mine. I returned to the edge of the stream whence I could not help admiring for a few minutes the awful grandeur of the scene. The valley seemed a vast amphitheater, surrounded on all sides by the dark woods as if by a black curtain. In its center, the moonlight played among the shattered remnants of the forest, creating 1,000 fantastic shapes. No sound of any kind, no murmur of life was audible. At last, I remembered my companion and called loudly to tell him of the result of my search, to advise him to cross the rivulet and to join me. The echo repeated my voice over and over again in the solitary woods, but I got no answer. I shouted again and listened again. The same death-like silence reigned. I became uneasy, and I ran by the side of the stream until I reached the place lower down where it was fordable. When I got there, I heard in the distance the sound of horses' feet, and soon after, Beaumont himself appeared. Surprised by my long absence, he had proceeded towards the rivulet. He was already in the shallow when I called him. The sound of my voice, therefore, had not reached him. He told me that he too had tried by every means to make himself heard, and, as well as I, had been alarmed at obtaining no answer. If it had not been for this ford, which had served us as a meeting place, we should perhaps have been looking for each other half the night. We resumed our journey with a full resolution of not again separating, and in 3/4 of an hour, we, at last, came upon a settlement, consisting of 2 or 3 huts and, what was still more satisfactory, a light. A violet-colored line of water in the hollow of the valley proved that we had arrived at Flint River. Soon, indeed, a loud barking echoed in the woods, and we found ourselves close to a log house, separated from us only by a fence. As we were preparing to climb over it, we saw in the moonlight a great black bear that, standing on his hind legs and at the very extremity of his chain, showed as clearly as he could his intention to give us a fraternal embrace. "What an infernal country is this," said I, "where they keep bears for watchdogs." "We must call," replied my companion. "If we attempted to get over the fence, it would be difficult to make the porter listen to reason." We hallooed at the top of our voices and with such success that at last, a man appeared at the window. After examining us by the light of the moon, "Enter, gentlemen," he said, "drink, go to bed. To the kennel, I say, they are not robbers." The bear waddled off, and we got in. We were half dead with fatigue. We asked our host if we could have oats for our horses. "Certainly," he replied, and began to mow the nearest field with American sang-froid, and as if it were noonday. Meanwhile, we unsaddled our horses, and as there was no stable, fastened them to the paling which we had just passed through. Having provided for our traveling companions, we began to think of our own rest. There was but one bed in the house, it was allotted to Beaumont. I wrapped myself in my cloak, and lay down on the floor, slept as soundly as a man does who has ridden 40 miles. This concludes this week's special edition story. Thank you for taking the time to listen to Thumbwind's End of the Road podcast. If you like this kind of story, you are invited to join other monthly visitors on our website at thumbwind.com. Please watch for and download next week's continuation of Alexis de Tocqueville's Saginaw Trail story next Sunday evening. Please take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and give us a review. From the end of the road. Have a great day.